You are listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network.
Welcome to Scuderia F1, the podcast that's always up to speed with the latest Formula One news. Follow us on Twitter at Scuderia F1 Pod and subscribe to the show on iTunes and Stitcher. Now, here are your hosts, Mark Dailey and Kevin Laramée.
Hello and welcome to the podcast that is always up to speed with Formula One. Mark Dailey here, welcoming you to this week's show. And guys, wow, what an Austrian Grand Prix. Absolutely fantastic stuff. And what a great time of summer this is. I think I've been saying over the past couple of weeks how much I've really been looking forward to this part of 2018. We're in the round of 16 at the World Cup in Russia. That's going to be over by the time most of you listen to this program. And we've got one more race in this triple header in Formula One, which goes this weekend at Silverstone for the British Grand Prix, then a week off, and then we finish up with the German Grand Prix and Hungarian Grand Prix before the summer break. And I'm enjoying it. Life is good at the moment if you're a sports fan. So let's talk now about the Austrian Grand Prix and what a race that was. I must admit, I really enjoyed that one, even though perhaps if you're a fan of Mercedes and Valtteri Bottas and Lewis Hamilton, obviously not the way that you wanted it to go. The qualifying, of course, started out pretty good. Things were looking pretty good for Mercedes. Front row lockout for Bottas and Hamilton. Valtteri was on pole position for the second year in a row. Last year, he started the race and won it in Austria on a track, the A1 ring, which is one that he really likes. And this year he qualified with a time of 103.130. Hamilton just behind him, only about, a real small margin. His time was 103.149. Sebastian Vettel qualified in third with a 103.464 in the Ferrari, but then had to incur a 3 grid place penalty after the stewards found him guilty of blocking Carlos Sainz. Which I think if you're Vettel, you got to be a little bit frustrated about. He said afterwards he didn't realize that Sainz was there and that the team didn't warn him about it. So a little bit of tough luck. So that moved Kimi Räikkönen up into third, and then Max Verstappen and Romain Grosjean in the Haas Ferrari qualifying in fifth for this race. And that was 2 spots ahead of his teammate Kevin Magnussen, and they sandwiched Danny Ricciardo on the second Red Bull there. A big turnaround for Haas this weekend, and we'll get to them a little bit later on. And then it was very exciting. Let's just put it that way. The start of the race, Kimi Räikkönen got a very good start there. Managed to split the 2 Mercedes cars, but didn't actually manage to take the lead. And there was all sorts of jostling and going around. And it was quite something. Sebastian Vettel, unfortunately, if you're a fan of Seb, got pushed a little bit wide in the first corner, and his race was made a little bit more miserable, dropping from 6th down to 8th by the time they got to the first corner. And it was a fascinating race to watch when you saw that just the tire strategies employed. I think Vettel started on the Ultra Softs, which is different to the other front running cars, the Red Bulls, his teammate, and the 2 Mercedes who were also on the super soft tires. But the big shock in the race early on came when Valtteri Bottas had to retire because of a hydraulic issue. He came out of turn 3, wasn't able to shift, and then just pulled over, and that was his race done. And that was a real shocker, obviously, because Bottas was running very well, despite losing out a little bit at the beginning there. But Mercedes, I think, coming into this race, what with all the upgrades that they've brought over the past couple of weeks, I was starting to get that little bit of an ominous feeling because Lewis Hamilton did so well in France last weekend when he won the French Grand Prix at Paul Ricard, and they introduced more upgrades for the Austrian Grand Prix this weekend, and I was starting to get a little bit of that sinking feeling that, well, okay, if Mercedes has kind of figured out how to gain back some of that advantage, then maybe they're going to pull away from Red Bull and from Ferrari, and it's going to be silver all the way till the end of the year. Well, if you're a Mercedes fan, that's not a bad thing, but I've really been enjoying the season so far, and just considering each and every weekend really seems to be a back and forth between any one of these top three teams. And I think it's really great to see that Red Bull's back in the mix, just to make it all that more unpredictable. Anyhow, just going back to the aftermath of Bottas and his retirement, was that they brought out a virtual safety car while they just got his car removed from the track and out of the danger zone. And this was what I thought was a second interesting thing. Over the past couple of years, especially going back maybe to 2016, Ferrari were the ones that always had the really suspect tactics and didn't really come out on top. I think that we've seen, especially this year, that Red Bull seems to be on point. They're the ones that seem to have the strategy down, and they're very good at thinking on their feet. This time, it was Mercedes that really got caught looking in the wrong direction, or looking with the sun in their eyes, whatever you want to call it, because while the virtual safety car was out on the track, both Ferrari and Red Bull double stacked their cars, changed their tires, and went out. And that meant that even though Lewis Hamilton was still leading Max Verstappen, Danny Ricciardo, Kimi Räikkönen, and Sebastian Vettel, by the time you really took a look at where he would come out, once that would be corrected, once he would go in for his own pit stop, then he was actually running about fourth position in the race at that time. And lo and behold, that's exactly what happened later on when Lewis Hamilton actually did pit for tires. He came out a couple of seconds in front of Sebastian Vettel, and that was obviously a very frustrating moment for the quadruple world champion. Lewis never afraid to speak his mind, and I think it was very interesting to hear what he was saying when he was on the race radio, just saying that, we've thrown this race away. We've thrown away basically what was an easy win. And, you heard James Vowles, who's the head of strategy of Mercedes, getting on the radio and apologizing to him. It was all academic in the end, because Lewis Hamilton surprisingly had blistering issues with the set of tires that he put on, because he ended up pitting about 10 laps later than the other four cars that were behind him at the time. So that meant, at least I think the expectation was he would come out, make his one pit stop of the race, and have rubber that's 10 laps fresher than everybody else, and then be able to... Well, basically, I think we all expected Lewis to recover, and when you think that Lewis has got a good car underneath him, you always expect that good things are going to happen. But with this blistering issue that he had on the tires, and also plagued Danny Ricciardo and plagued so many other cars, which we'll get to in a little bit, meant that he just wasn't able to really race very hard. I was really looking forward to it when he came back out in front of Vettel. I thought maybe we might actually get a chance to see Hamilton and Vettel go head-to-head, which we haven't really seen too many times over the years, and seems to be a bit of a rare treat. And just the issues that Hamilton was having did mean that eventually, on lap 39, that Sebastian Vettel was able to make a bold move on him. And actually, I thought it was quite a good move from Vettel, right up in that turn 3 up at the top of the hill, that 90-degree corner, managed to get on the inside of Hamilton at the end of that DRS zone and put a good move on him there. Of course, we've seen Hamilton have a bit of drama at that corner before, coming together there with former teammate Nico Rosberg, I believe, in 2016. But the real shocker, if it wasn't shocking enough to see one Mercedes car retire from the race with mechanical issues earlier on, was the fact that Hamilton himself ended up retiring from the race later on. And there was a bit of foreshadowing, and I was really wondering what was going on at the time, because Hamilton did mention at one point, he said, guys, I'm experiencing some loss of power or something like that. And I was wondering exactly what it was. I was watching his lap times after he made that admission on the radio. And of course, his lap times were still very competitive. Ultimately, he did retire because of what was a fuel pressure issue. So perhaps maybe that's what part of that loss of power was that he was referring to at that point in the race. But he just wasn't able to finish it. So shocking. And just the way that the whole race finished up. We had Max Verstappen in first. Teammate Danny Ricciardo ended up retiring with a problem with his exhaust in his Renault engine. In his Red Bull, and that meant that Kimi Räikkönen came second and Sebastian Vettel in third. And wow, that really shook things up. So that means that now in the Drivers' Championship, And Sebastian Vettel has leapfrogged Lewis Hamilton by a single point and is now leading the Drivers' Championship by 146 to 145 points. And then in the Constructors' Championship, Ferrari has now leapfrogged Mercedes and are leading that category, 247 compared to 237 points for Mercedes. And shocking, I know. I mean, how often do we see a Mercedes car retire? I didn't really look into this one, so correct me if I'm wrong. I believe that the last time Lewis retired with a mechanical issue, at least as far as I can remember, was that not Malaysia 2016? That was right during that last run of a series of races at that year, where Nico Rosberg really seemed to be, I'd say, managing and really taking a risk-adverse approach to the end of the season, just getting the results that he needed, and then Lewis Hamilton really pushing. I think it was the big end that let go in Hamilton's car on that day. So perhaps he had a mechanical issue last year. I don't remember off the top of my head. And it was the first DNF since 26, or double DNF, I should say, for Mercedes since I guess it was Spain 2016 when Rosberg and Hamilton crashed on the opening lap of the Spanish Grand Prix. And the benefactor of that day, of course, was Max Verstappen, who won his first ever career Formula One race. So I guess simply put, when bad things happen for Mercedes, good things happen for Max Verstappen. Wow. And then just one final interesting statistic is that this was the first double DNF for mechanical failure for Mercedes, I think since 1955 or 1956. It's been a hell of a long time. Let's just put it that way. But very good. I was very pleased to see Max Verstappen win that race. Obviously, Max has had his problems this year. And I was saying before the race started, I was saying that I really thought that Bottas was going to win that one, considering he'd done so well there last year. He was on pole position this year. And I thought that he really deserved it after he's had obviously some bad luck this year. The most notable one, of course, was when he was leading in Baku at the Azerbaijan Grand Prix a couple months ago. Ran over some debris late in the race, punctured his tires, and then ended up retiring from that one. So very disappointing for Valtteri, but give credit where credit is due. I've been critical of Max Verstappen this year, and obviously his team and Dr. Helmut Marko said just as recently as the Monaco Grand Prix last month that he needed to really focus and get things under control, because he was just really erratic. I mean, making some driving mistakes, driving into other cars, getting involved in controversy where he didn't need to. But since that incident in free practice in Monaco, Max obviously started at the back of the grid, but recovered nicely in that race, which although Monaco's impossible really to make up ground, he did very well. I mean, let's give him credit. He's done well in Canada, did well in France, and now winning the Grand Prix. I mean, ever since that, whatever the conversations he had with Marko, with his dad Jos Verstappen, whoever else, family, friends, advisors, whatever, I think the message has gotten through to Max Verstappen. He seems calmer, he seems more focused. Obviously, he's very quick, and that move that he put on Kimi Räikkönen at the Austrian Grand Prix, I think it was briefly looked at by the stewards, because Kimi, he was looking pretty good. I mean, he did very good through that opening lap, but then quickly got swallowed up by the Mercedes and then Max Verstappen. I was thinking, oh gosh, well, what's wrong with Kimi? Does he have a problem here? And then you hear on the radio Räikkönen saying that he got hit by one of the Red Bulls. Couldn't really see it at the time, but when you saw the in-car camera from both Räikkönen and from Verstappen, it was pretty obvious. First of all, you saw it from Kimi's point of view, and you can just see the car wiggle a little bit. But when you see the camera from Verstappen's car, it was pretty obvious. It was an aggressive move. But hey, I mean, it worked out. It was a bit of a wheel tap, Max's right front tire on Kimi's left rear, but they didn't crash. Räikkönen wasn't pushed off of the track, didn't suffer adversely, and yeah, aggressive, sure. Reckless, no, I don't think so, and definitely it was not some of the more questionable moves that we've seen Max put on people earlier this year. And amazing to think, what with all the drama and all the changes going around, what with virtual safety cars and pit stops and tires blistering and cars retiring, that move fairly early on in the first couple laps of the race actually turned out to be the move of the race. I think it was a great move, and Raikkonen said afterwards he thought that both he and Max did very well not to crash. So fair enough. And Christian Horner, the team principal at Red Bull, came out after the race to praise a disciplined and mature Max Verstappen, and he hailed Verstappen's ability to manage his tires en route to winning the Austrian Grand Prix, and that was true. While a lot of cars were really having problems with blistering, Ricciardo, his teammate, won. Lewis Hamilton, another, and so many other cars throughout the field. There was one point, I think that Max said on the radio, I think he did say he had a bit of a vibration or something in the car, and his engineers mentioned something about the blistering, and Max, and rather calmly, I thought, almost a little bit nonchalant, said, don't worry about me, everything's just going fine. And he did very well. Of course, the two Ferraris did manage to close the gap towards the end of the race. I was wondering at one point whether or not if they would be able to catch up and maybe push Max a little bit, but that gap that was, I think, about 5 to 6 or 7 seconds was reduced to about a second and a half by the end of the race. So who knows, if they had another half a dozen laps or so, maybe Raikkonen might have been able to push Max for that. But that doesn't necessarily mean that Raikkonen would have been able to get around him and take the victory for himself. But it was that blistering. Boy, was that ever an issue? And we'll talk about that in a minute. I think the air temperature at the track was something about 23, 22 degrees centigrade. Not terribly warm. I mean, very pleasant. Fairly mild for a summer afternoon. But the track temperature more than doubled, and that really caused a lot of problems. But just to finish up that thought, Horner said that Max was very much in control. He said it was a very disciplined and mature drive. He had a good feeling for the tires, the slip, the control, and it was a very, very impressive win. So he said, and going back to what I was saying a little bit earlier, his first win in Barcelona, and Horner reminisced on that, saying it was a very similar circumstances. He said that race was very much about tire conservation that day, because he said even on Sunday at Spielberg at the A1 ring, he said that the track temperatures were about 10 to 12 degrees hotter than it was a couple of days earlier during free practice. Now, I love this next one. I saw this on ESPNF1.com, and the article was titled "Max Verstappen Refusing to Rule Out Title Challenge." And went on to say Verstappen has his sights on challenging for the driver's title after winning the Austrian Grand Prix. When he asked if a challenge for the title is realistic, Verstappen told Sky Sports, quote, "Well, we never give up, like I said. It's a good run we are having now, but still we need a bit more engine power, and then we can definitely be in the mix." Okay, I mean, if you're in the media, you got to ask that question. But Verstappen, he's got a lot of work to do if he's actually going to insert himself in that conversation for the World Championship. At this point in time, the beginning of July 2nd, Sebastian Vettel and Lewis Hamilton are running neck and neck, and Kimi Raikkonen is the next closest one in third place with 101 points. Ricciardo's fourth with 96. Verstappen is third with 93 points, and Valtteri Bottas dropping like a rock through the Drivers' Championship. He's back in sixth position now with 92, and he's going to stay there for a while unless K-Mag and the Haas can find a way to bag a big amount of points, because Magnussen is seventh in the Drivers' Championship with 37. But yeah, I mean, Verstappen, to get anywhere close to Sebastian Vettel, he needs something like 47, about 53 points to tie Sebastian Vettel at the top of the race, or the top of the championship there. Formula One, of course, is a very funny and unpredictable sport at times, and even though it's been more unpredictable and a better season, I think, by far than a lot of people were predicting, with the what do you want to call it, the rebirth, the resurrection of Red Bull this year has certainly made things interesting, but that to me just seems like a bit of a long shot at the moment. Hey, Max, love him. If he can do it, it'd be great. It would be exciting, but I don't know. I think he has a shot to win a couple more races this year. And I think even Verstappen himself said that that probably wouldn't happen this weekend at Silverstone, but probably his next shot to realistically win a Grand Prix would be at the Hungarian Grand Prix at the end of this month. And speaking of Sebastian Vettel, he said that he was very impressed with Max Verstappen's Austrian Grand Prix performance. And he said that he won it after he made virtually no mistakes. Like I was saying a little earlier, it was a very courageous move, very aggressive move that he put on Kimi Räikkönen. But other than that, he was completely flawless. So Sebastian said that he won the race because he deserved to. He did it very well, managing his tires to the end, and he didn't have any mistakes. And of course, Seb goes on to say, I didn't see him going off, so that's a strong performance from him. So what do you think? That's a 4-time world champion praising perhaps somebody that has all the bona fides and all the hallmarks, I think, of somebody that could be a world champion at some time in the future. Now, let's talk about the debacle that was Mercedes Sunday afternoon at the A1 ring. Lewis Hamilton said after the race that he believes that Mercedes need a, quote, bulletproof strategy solution. And he said that, of course, after what he said, the team threw away an easy win at the Austrian Grand Prix. And like I was saying earlier, he lost that due to a strategy miscalculation when he was not brought in under the virtual safety car, and that really messed things up for him. I mean, the fuel pressure problem notwithstanding, he would have had a lot of work to really get back to first place. And I think it's interesting, I mean, especially like last week, that once you see those top 5 or 6 cars all running together, that there is not a lot of opportunity to make ground up on one another. I mean, if you remember last week at Paul Ricard, when Sebastian Vettel and Valtteri Bottas came together at the first corner, they ended up at the back of the pack, and Sebastian really carved his way through the field rather quickly. I think by about lap 20 or thereabouts, he was back in the top 5. Kimi Räikkönen, his teammate, was in P4 at the time. And that time gap between the two of them did not really change very much. You know, you'd sort of watch lap after lap. They were pretty even, unless there was the odd time when one or the other came up and was lapping a car or something like that. And the same thing I noticed on Sunday at the Austrian Grand Prix. So Lewis would have really needed to find something special to really get back up into first place, and you could tell as much. And the wording that Lewis, the way that he was saying things over the radio, he was pretty blunt and to the point. He's just saying, guys, we threw away an easy win. He said, I'm not going to be able to pass these guys in front of me. And when you're a guy that's used to being out front and used to winning races and championships like Lewis Hamilton, I mean, that must be so frustrating to end up where you do on the track because of what was basically a mental error, a lapse in judgment that they really should have done better in. But of course, as I was saying earlier, it really seems that Red Bull is the team to really look to. They're the ones that really are able to think on their feet, and we've seen it several times this year. These bold moves and quick moves to take advantage of situations like that. And of course, it looked like it was not going to be their day at Shanghai earlier in the year at the Chinese Grand Prix, but after the two Toro Rossos crashed at I think it was about halfway through the race, whatever it was, and brought out the safety car, they did the same thing, very quick to react to the situation. And unfortunately, that day, Max Verstappen collided with Sebastian Vettel and robbed himself not only of a possible victory, but certainly robbed them of a double podium. Of course, Danny Ricciardo went on to win that race in China, but it's interesting to see that Ferrari, of course, that they did the same thing and double stacked Raikkonen and Sebastian Vettel at the same time. And Ferrari haven't always been the best ones when it's come to the pit stop strategy. They've gotten better over the past couple of years, but definitely in Austria it was Mercedes that came out worse for wear. And Hamilton, he was pretty blunt, and he said afterwards, quote, "I'm not going to lie, all areas we are going to have to work on. The car has been great all weekend. We were the quickest, but to have two different faults on each car, which is very unusual, we really can't throw away points. Everyone in the team is really feeling the pain today, but I think you just have to look at it. We have had such great reliability for so many years, and as painful as it is, we are perfectionists. We really have to take the rough with the smooth. This definitely is the worst weekend for us, and I can remember for a long, long time. I have every confidence in my team that we'll be able to bounce back. Hey, and what better time to bounce back this weekend than the British Grand Prix? Hamilton has won there a couple of times, won there last weekend, and I think that would be a great way to turn his bit of a rough patch around here this past weekend. And I think, obviously, when it comes to the British Grand Prix and Hamilton, being Lewis Hamilton and being a proud Brit himself, is really going to go out flying on Saturday. But his teammate, Valtteri Bottas, said after the race that his poor luck feels like, quote, a bad joke. And he said that, well, I mean, it's not just this past weekend, but the entire season so far. It says it feels like a bad joke. And Bottas, of course, he beat Hamilton to the pole, dropped to the fourth after a poor start. And then he was already back up to second, but then out of the race with hydraulic pressure. And Bottas said, quote, the luck I'm having this year feels like a bit of bad luck at the moment, or a bit of bad joke at the moment. My start was not ideal, had a bit of wheel spin, and there was less grip than we expected, so I dropped a few places. Tough luck for Valtteri, but I think other than that, I think he's been doing the job for Mercedes this year. And I think the question was even put to Niki Lauda, the non-executive chairman at Mercedes, after qualifying on Saturday, whether Valtteri, after he had clinched pole position, I think the question was something, are you going to keep him for 2019? I think now allowed to quit back. Well, why wouldn't we? And I think that Bottas, despite all the bad luck he has had, I think that he's really proven to be a good teammate at Mercedes. I think there that he's obviously, Toto Wolff has taken a different approach after Nico Rosberg retired. And that whole thing of having, your number one and Lewis Hamilton, maybe your 1A and Nico Rosberg. Obviously, Hamilton lap for lap was always going to be the faster, the better of the two drivers. But Rosberg was able to push him and was able to win his fair share of races, and of course did win a world championship. But that relationship was toxic at the best of times. And I think that Bottas's role is not so much to push for a world championship himself. Well, maybe it is, but I think maybe more that he's there to maximize the points for Mercedes, be a good teammate to Lewis Hamilton, help them win the Constructors' Championship, and more than anything else, take points away from Sebastian Vettel and Ferrari. I think that, I think they wouldn't mind if he won a world championship, but I don't think they would want to get back in a situation where it would be Valtteri and Lewis Hamilton fighting for it like he did with Rosberg several times. All right. Well, we were talking a little bit earlier about giving credit where credit is due. So let's give some props to Haas F1, who had a very good race this past weekend. Their two cars qualified in 6th and 8th. Of course, they moved up a spot after the penalty or at least Romain Grosjean did, moved up a spot after Sebastian Vettel was penalized. But a very good rebound for them. It's been a difficult year for them. They came out very, very good at the Austrian Grand Prix, and then had issues with their pit stops, which forced both of the cars out, and they've had issues now and again. But Kevin Magnussen has been doing fairly decently. He's like I was saying earlier, he's 7th in the Constructors' Championship. He's the top of the best of the rest, if you want to call him that. Who doesn't drive a Ferrari, a Red Bull, or a Mercedes car. So he's been very good, quietly racking up points here and there. He had a bit of controversy in Azerbaijan when he had a bit of an incident with Toro Rosso's Pierre Gasly, which Gasly went on to label K-Mag as dangerous, but still, I mean, he's been piling up points for them. But Grosjean, his teammate, Romain Grosjean, has had all sorts of problems this year, hadn't scored a single point before the Austrian Grand Prix, but did very well to qualify where he did. And they were the Sky Sports commentators, David Croft and Martin Brundle, were talking to Haas team principal Gene Steiner, hybrid of the team owner and the team principal. Gunther Steiner said that the goal on Saturday was to get both cars into Q3, and that's exactly what they did. did, but they managed to nail it. Both cars finished the race. Romain Grosjean actually came home in fourth position, which is an absolutely fantastic result for them. And good for Romain Grosjean. I've been pretty critical about him. I mean, some of the things that he's done this year really haven't been very flattering to him. There was the accident he had at Baku when he put the car into the wall under his safety car. The big spin he had in the first lap of the Spanish Grand Prix in turn 3 when bizarrely, rather than just running off wide off of the track, he decided to put the hammer down, spin out, create a gigantic smoke cloud, which could have been a very disastrous situation. But in the end, he ended up colliding with Nico Hülkenberg's Renault and then also Pierre Gasly. So, I mean, he just has done some bizarre things this year. But, I mean, credit where credit is due. I mean, he did have a decent, a very good race and a good qualifying, as did his teammate Kevin Magnussen, who also finished in the top 5. He was fourth and fifth for Haas, and I mean, you can't argue with that. And Gene Haas, the team owner, he refused to really get too carried away with the result. He said that the car had good pace all weekend, but he felt that it was a one race for redemption. He went on to say, well, if we can do it for 5 races, then maybe we've got something. But just going back to talk a little bit more about Romain Grosjean, he was saying that his tires were about to explode, and he really struggled over the last couple of laps and really doubted at one point whether or not he'd make it to the end. And it was quite funny when he crossed the line. He said something to the effect of, bro, when you see these rear tires, they've blistered like you've never seen in your life, or something to that effect. So good for them. We'll wait and see whether or not Haas can repeat that this weekend at the British Grand Prix, but a good race for them in Austria nonetheless. But just talking now about the blistering issue that Renault had, or not just Renault, but all of the teams, but Carlos Sainz, he suffered a little bit more than most. He just said that the blistering that the Pirelli tires had made his car undrivable. And it's very interesting because I don't know what it is exactly in the design of the Renault this year, but they seem to struggle more with tires more than anyone else. But he was just not able to really get anything out of the tires that he had. But Pirelli did admit that they were surprised by the amount of blistering that they had in Austria. But they say that it is a known issue at the Red Bull Ring. And it wasn't even really a talking point. It wasn't really an issue earlier in the weekend when everybody was really focusing on the graining on the tires. But when the tires, when the track temperature went up on Sunday, it really pushed the tires over the edge, especially the soft compound, and that really affected a lot of guys' races. Like I was saying, Hamilton and Ricciardo were the two most notable guys. And Pirelli F1 boss Mario Isola said that the blistering is part of the game, but it shouldn't be taken to the extreme, whatever that means. He said last year on the track we had some blisters, so we consider this a track that has the potential for blistering. All right, well, let's start wrapping this thing up now. And like I was saying, this weekend we have the third of the triple header, third race, which of course will be the British Grand Prix at Silverstone, which is one of my favorites. And hopefully we'll get news sooner rather than later that Silverstone is going to sign a new deal to extend beyond 2019. Of course, they triggered that early release clause last year, but they have been in discussions with the commercial rights holders, Liberty Media, to get that deal sorted out. And both parties have said publicly that that's something that is in the best interest for both of them. The rest of the discussions and the state thereof has been held behind closed doors, and fair enough. But hopefully it won't be too long before that is made known that. And hopefully it's going to be a good outcome. Anyways, there will be a new challenge at Silverstone this weekend with the addition of a new DRS zone. and that will be in the new DRS zone at turn 1, which will be absolutely fantastic to see, watching the cars going through that first corner with their wings open. And this is part of the FIA's continuing quest, if you want to call it that, to improve overtaking. And the third DRS zone will be added along the start-finish straight at Silverstone. And it's kind of cool because if you look at where it's going to be with Abby's the first right-hander, and then following Farm, the left-hander, both being flat out on during the race, especially when the cars have low fuel, means that the drivers will have the option of keeping the DRS open through the turns. So it could be quite interesting to watch, especially with the reduced amount of downforce at the rear, means that some cars might actually risk getting out of shape and spinning out. So should be good fun watching them with that DRS zone. I think that extra one they added in Austria this past weekend did help. I know that you can go back to that old argument that DRS is a little bit of artificial overtaking, or whatever you want to call it, just because the aero effect that these cars have make it very difficult to get within a couple of seconds. And that is something, of course, that they're really looking at for next year and beyond, and 2021 and beyond, of course, to really find a formula and a set of rules and specifications that will really lend itself to increased overtaking in its most, I guess, pure, organic, natural form, whatever you want to call it. But hey, DRS is what we have right now, and if they can increase the opportunity for overtaking with adding extra DRS zones at Grand Prix, then I'm all for it. And also, like I've been saying the past couple of weeks, I've been extremely excited and enjoying this condensed and rather jam-packed Formula One schedule. But good news is that the 2019 season will start a week earlier than usual. The Australian Grand Prix is set for the March 14th to 17th slots. That will be ratified by the World Motorsport Council at some point, and March is actually a very busy time in the sports calendar in Melbourne, in Australia, and apparently it does conflict with the start of the Australian Football League season the week afterwards. So that's part of the conflict, and also it'll be interesting because this year, next season, moving the start of the F1 calendar forward a week means that it will. It will conflict with the World Endurance Championship Sebring fixture, which means that we could perhaps not see Fernando Alonso in Australia, assuming that we see Fernando Alonso sign a contract with McLaren or another F1 team for 2019. Anyways, I'm going to wrap it up there, guys. It's been an extremely busy weekend here for me. I was covering World Cup matches all weekend and trying to fit in Formula One between that. So actually, I'm ready to go back to work. Sunday was Canada Day here in the true North Strong and Free, so we are enjoying Monday as a day off, with our national holiday falling on a weekend. So that means my Monday is a Tuesday, so by the time you are listening to this podcast, I will be struggling through my first cup of coffee at the office and trying to get my week started, but it's all good. Anyways, of course, now that we're in July means that we're only a couple of days away from Independence Day. So happy 4th of July to all of my American friends and all of my American listeners. I hope you have enjoy your national holiday as well. And, well, we'll be right back at it in a couple of days. The British Grand Prix goes later this week, and I can't wait. Until then, please do me a big favor, and Kevin as well, who will be back in a couple of weeks after not the Formula One season is over, but the World Cup is over, and then we will get back to our normal programming here on Scuderia F1. But if you could do us a big favor, which will help us grow the show and make it more visible, if you could leave us a 5-star review and a rating on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, wherever you download your podcast from, we would greatly appreciate that. As always, comments and feedback are always welcome. You can do that on Twitter at ScuderiaF1Pod, or you can email us at ScuderiaF1Pod@gmail.com. Anyways, until next time, that's a wrap, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks for listening to the Scuderia F1 podcast. If you want to get the show notes for this episode, then head over to ScuderiaF1pod.com. Want to get in touch with us? Then email us at ScuderiaF1pod@gmail.com.
You were listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us, sportspodcastingnetwork.com.